And from there, the only place to go is Chris Tompkins. It's such a pleasure to have you back. It feels like it's been a minute, but on the same token, it also feels like yesterday, and that's a pretty sweet way to do life. So, Chris, I'm so glad you're here. I'd love to hear just a few things and maybe tell people about a little bit about your book at some point too. But you know what to do. So, Chris, I'm turning it over to you.
Yes, okay. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Garrick. Thank you, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here and to be in this space. I love Inspire. I can feel the love. So thank you. And thank you, Amina, for asking me to speak. When she reached out this week, I started to think about, and she told me the theme of Radiate Love. And, I love the theme. And I was thinking, I said a prayer, to be of service and ask, God, higher power to use me and to share, what would be helpful. And so, what came through to me was, it's Pride Month, of course, and Inspire. And Inspire has been such a big part of my healing journey. And so what came through is to talk about humility. Um, and, there was a long time that I didn't radiate love. And, that came from a place of not loving myself. And we know from a spiritual perspective that in order to know one thing, we have to have experienced the other. And so for me, I remember a few years ago going to a workshop, and it was put on by a woman named Kelby. And she used to be the director of the LGBT Resource Center at USC. And she gave a workshop at a LGBTQ youth conference that I went to. And she also was an ordained minister. And so part of her job was she would go into hospitals. Before she was at the LGBT Resource Center at USC, she would help people with their last rites. So she worked in hospice. And one of the things that she talked about at this workshop was one of the things that she would do, depending on where the person was at, and there's was to assess their kind of spiritual wellness, their spiritual health. And that would kind of gauge the work that she would do with them. And the thing and how she would gauge whether or not, someone was spiritually well or not was this sort of questions that she would ask them. And there was a scale. And on one side of the scale, it had many different items on the scale, characteristics, but one of them was pride. And on the opposite of pride was humility. And she said during this workshop that she would be able to assess someone's spiritual wellness by how high their level of humility was. And I thought that was really interesting, and this was a few years ago. And it's gotten me thinking a lot about humility. And so this morning when I wanted to talk about humility, because it's been in my humility that I've been able to learn how to love myself, which ultimately allows me to radiate love. Certainly pride, being proud of myself. But I often say that, multiple things can be true at the same time. And so this morning when I woke up, part of my daily spiritual practice is I read from a daily reader. And just to ensure that I was giving the right message, my higher power, the reading, it's from a book that I read from called The Courage to Change. And the whole reading was on humility. And I'll just read a short, because, what is the definition of humility? And so I'll just read a short version. It says, the last thing I need to be is more humble. Hadn't I been humble all my life, putting everyone's needs ahead of my own? But perhaps I had confused humility with humiliation. Humility does not mean begging for mercy. Real humility, I discovered, is the ability to see my true relationship to God and to my fellow human beings. And so that for me was a perfect example of what it is that I wanted to talk about for me, about my journey of learning how to radiate love. And I wanted to share an excerpt from my book, Raising LGBTQ Allies. And it's a short little section, and the chapter that I'm reading from is about shame. Because shame has certainly been a part of my experience coming out and learning to love myself. And so I'm just going to share the short excerpt, but I'll start here. It says, one day while I was bartending a few years ago, a nervous young man sat at my bar. I could sense his energy, and so I walked over to greet him. He also seemed young, so I asked for his ID. Something told me to make small talk to help put him at ease. His ID was from Colombia, so I asked if he lived in Los Angeles or was just visiting. He said he was visiting his mother for the holidays, but lived in Colombia. He was so nervous, he could barely make eye contact. I asked him how he liked living in Colombia. He said he really liked it, but that it was challenging being himself. He said that this was his first time at a gay bar. He had Googled gay bar, and that's how he wound up sitting in front of me. He told me he just came to terms with his sexuality and finally acknowledged he was gay. He was 25 years old. As he looked to his right and to his left, almost as if he was checking to see if anyone was watching him, I found myself looking into a mirror. He was me. He was me when I was 25 years old. I felt the urge to take him into my arms, hug him, and tell him everything was going to be okay. While working at a gay bar, I met many people at various stages of their coming out process. This particular occasion was the first time I had felt and seen myself in someone so clearly before. It was a huge reminder of the connectedness of our human condition. It also reminded me, although the LGBTQ community has made great strides, there is still more work for us to do. The young man I met that day said it wasn't safe for him to be out. There weren't even gay bars or places to hang out where he lives. It made me grateful for what I have and that I live here in the United States. I think being gay or lesbian or transgender and living here, especially in larger cities like New York or Los Angeles, we tend to take for granted our freedom and forget the young people growing up in places where they continue to be bullied for being themselves. I recently read that one of the fundamental keys to success is humility. I think it goes beyond success and that it's one of the fundamental keys to life. It was in my humility that I saw myself in the young man and shared compassionately my experiences. I told him he reminded me of myself. He looked up at me, smiled, and asked, "Really?" I said, "Yes, and it's an honor to meet you." I bought him a Bud Light, gave him a glass of water, and my email address. He emailed me a few days after we met to say thank you for supporting people like him. I replied, "It was really great to meet you, and I'm glad you came in. I was really struck by how much you reminded me of myself. I can completely relate to what you're going through right now, and so I just want to let you know you aren't alone. You seem like a happy, successful, and healthy young man, but I remember what I was going through on the inside when I was your age. Coming out is a process, so make sure you remember to love yourself." That was one of the things I didn't know to do while I was coming out, and it eventually caught up with me and my choices. The best thing you can do for yourself and for the entire LGBTQ community is to love yourself on the inside and not be afraid to show who you are. Cuídate mucho y nos hablamos pronto. That's take good care and we'll talk soon. And I continue to say that the old adage says that when we give a person a fish, we feed them for a day. If we teach them how to fish, we feed them for a lifetime. Demonstrating to others how to love themselves from the inside out is the antidote to shame. Giving young people the space to discover who they are while encouraging them to share authentically their lives with us helps prevent shame before we have to treat its harmful effects. So that is a little, for me, reminder of where I came from. And I think it's through humility that I'm able to continue to remember that. Because for me, when I immediately came out of the closet, it was really easy to immerse myself into LGBTQ advocacy. I got really involved. In fact, that's why I moved out to Los Angeles, was to work for a large national LGBTQ organization. But it was a few years after working there that my life kind of hit rock bottom. And I realized that although I had this external life, the internal life wasn't being tended to. And so it took a lot of humility for me to realize that and to recognize that and to go within myself. And it was through humility that I was able to access my pride, to access being proud of myself, which ultimately is how I'm able to radiate love and to continue to love myself. One of my beliefs, my true beliefs, and I learned this through my years at INSPIRE, is that connecting with our spirituality, learning to love ourselves, and taking full responsibility for our lives and our choices is where our strength lies at the deepest level. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And that for me is how I'm able to radiate love. So thank you.
Beautiful, Chris. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Chris. And I have to just reflect back to you that you automatically radiate love just by being. There is something about your presence that radiates so much love. And so if we can all remember to relax, to love ourselves, then we automatically radiate from the overflow. And Chris, what a beautiful example you are of that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And your book, is it available on Amazon? Yes, Amazon.com. So again, look up Chris Tompkins. His name is all spelled out in the newsletter that you received. Definitely support him because he does some really, really great work in our community. And really, all of us do great work in our own unique, specific way. Like he was tending bar, but he made an impact on someone else, and in turn, it impacted him, and he got to share it with all of us. And that's the beauty of love. You're just doing you, right? Chris was just being Chris, connected with this young man, helped this young man remember the truth of his own divinity. So this man is different. This man's town in Colombia is different. And now we're all different because Chris had the experience that he shared with this young man and with us.
Yes.
We all get to be that way, that in our own unique and specific way.